A drunk bully slapped a 78-year-old widow to the ground while she prayed under a Christmas tree. The crowd froze in fear. He thought he ruled this town, but he didn't know her son was a Navy SEAL, and his loyal K-9 was already coming to protect her. Comment where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please subscribe for more miracles of courage and God's protection. A gentle snowfall dusted Snowbridge, Vermont, turning the town square into a quiet dream of twinkling white. Under the towering Christmas tree, wrapped in silver garlands and warm golden lights, Margaret Maggie Harper knelt on the cold stone bench. She was 78 years old, small and thin, wrapped in a forest green wool coat that once belonged to her late husband. Her soft white hair was tucked neatly beneath a knitted beret, and her face, etched with the fine lines of a life lived with love and loss, carried a grace that time could not steal. Her hands, covered in worn gloves with slightly frayed fingertips, clasped together tightly, as if holding on to the last thread of her strength. The frost in the air seeped into her joints, but Maggie hardly noticed. Her inner world was louder than the wind, full of memories of Christmases past and the steady, reassuring presence of her husband, Thomas Harper. He had been a strong man once, a tall Army veteran with broad shoulders and eyes the color of storm clouds, someone who always stood slightly in front of her, as if shielding her from the darkness of the world. 10 years had passed since lung complications had taken him away, but Maggie still felt him in the cold December air, as though every snowflake brought a whisper of his warmth. "Thomas," she whispered in a voice that trembled like candlelight in the wind. "Darling, are you resting well?" She paused, unable to keep the small crack in her heart from widening. "Christmas doesn't feel like Christmas without you. I try to be strong, but the silence..." A tear slipped down her wrinkled cheek before she caught it with a gloved finger. "Maybe tonight, just tonight, you could send me a sign that I'm not alone." Around her, Snowbridge was alive in its own gentle way, children's laughter ringing as they chased each other through the snow, parents sipping hot cocoa from vendor stalls, carolers practicing nearby with slightly off-key enthusiasm. And yet Maggie felt as though she existed in a bubble apart from them, a quiet ghost floating through memories of a life so full, but now so undeniably empty. She often wondered if getting older meant becoming invisible, as though the world sped up while she slowed down, leaving her stranded in a shoreline of time. She missed being noticed, being needed. She missed having someone greet her when she walked into a room. She missed hearing the simple words, "Welcome home." Tonight, snowflakes clung to her eyelashes as she lifted her gaze toward the star at the top of the massive tree. One star twinkled brighter than the rest, like a stubborn heartbeat refusing to fade. She smiled weakly, letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, that could be her sign. But then a gust of wind howled through the square, snatching the warmth from the moment. Her fragile hope flickered. "Thomas," she whispered again, "please, don't let this Christmas be another one I spend in silence." She sighed and pulled her coat closer around her shoulders. Her knees protested against the hard stone beneath them, reminding her that she was not as young nor as strong as she once was. She remembered her first Christmas with Thomas, back in 1968, when they barely had money for gifts. They shared a pot of cheap soup and danced in their socks across a tiny apartment floor, laughing like fools in love. They had nothing to offer each other except loyalty. And somehow, that had been more than enough. Even now, she could almost feel the warmth of his rough hands holding hers. Almost. Maggie placed a small wrapped box beneath the tree, a tradition she kept every year since he passed. Inside was always a handwritten letter to Thomas, recounting the year, the moments she had survived without him, and the love that had not dimmed in the slightest. She wished she didn't have so many letters already. A light crunch of footsteps in the snow startled her, and she turned to see a young woman passing by with her daughter. The woman, tall with auburn hair tucked into a beanie, wearing stylish winter boots, glanced at Maggie with vague politeness, but continued walking without stopping. The little girl looked curious, her wide blue eyes lingering on the elderly woman kneeling alone, but her mother gently tugged her hand. Maggie forced a smile, pretending she didn't feel the sting of the exchange. She didn't blame them. People were busy, minds full of their own joys and worries. But the moment reminded her of the truth she tried hard to ignore. The world rarely paused long enough to see someone who moved slowly. She touched the bench beside her, the spot where she imagined Thomas sitting. "I still bring you presents," she murmured. "I still tell you everything, but I am tired of talking to shadows." A soft ache began to throb in her chest. Not physical pain, but the kind that tightened when reality pressed too close. She wished someone would notice her, talk to her, even just smile at her. She wished she didn't have to pretend she was fine when the truth was she hadn't felt truly fine in a decade. "Thomas?" Her voice cracked again, barely audible. "I don't need a miracle. I just need someone who sees me. Someone to call family." The Christmas lights glowed brighter as the snowfall thickened, wrapping the whole town in shimmering white silence. Maggie stayed there, eyes closed, breathing carefully, as if letting go of each fear one by one. She didn't yet know that this Christmas would be unlike any other. She didn't know that her whispered prayer had already been heard. She didn't know that at this very moment, just 2 blocks away, a young Navy SEAL and his loyal German shepherd were walking toward the square. 2 wandering souls unknowingly bound to hers by fate. Soon, her loneliness would be challenged. Soon, she would no longer pray alone. Soon, family would return to her life in a form she never dared imagine. Tonight, under the glow of the star-topped tree, Maggie Harper's story quietly shifted. The miracle she had begged for was already on its way. Night settled over Snowbridge like a heavy blanket, the Christmas lights flickering as though even they felt the cold tightening its grip. Maggie Harper rose from her prayer spot with slow care, brushing snow from her coat. Her knees ached, but she reminded herself it was a privilege to feel pain. It meant she was still here. She turned to leave, clutching her small purse, when a loud voice slashed through the gentle hum of carols. "Watch where you're going, old lady!" The shout came from a man stumbling out of the Northern Pine Bar across the street. His name was Rick Dalton, 42 years old, tall but letting his height sag under the weight of drunken imbalance. His once athletic frame had softened with years of unemployment and nights drinking bitterness into his bloodstream. His thick brown jacket was smeared with salt and spilled beer, his scruffy beard untrimmed, and his bloodshot hazel eyes were sharp with resentment. Rick was not always cruel. In another life he had been a loving brother, a hard worker, but life had twisted his path. Losing his construction job 2 years ago because of a workplace injury had slowly drowned him in rage and cheap whiskey. Tonight, drunk and angry, he scanned the square for a target upon whom to unload his misery. Maggie froze, trying to keep her dignity intact. "I'm so sorry, dear," she said softly, offering a polite nod. She hoped kindness might calm him, but Rick only scoffed, swaying closer. What are you doing anyway? Begging Santa for dentures? He laughed at his own cruel joke, and a few onlookers gave awkward glances before pretending to be busy with their phones. Maggie swallowed hard. It wasn't the insult that hurt. She had heard worse in life. It was the reminder that the world could be so indifferent. She straightened, meeting his glare with gentle strength. I'm just remembering my husband. I would appreciate it if... Oh, so now we're making the sidewalk a cemetery? His voice rose, and so did the heat under his skin. The scent of whiskey clung to him like poison. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. Too rough, too sudden, and shoved. Maggie stumbled backward, her feet slipping on the icy stone. Her body crumpled to the ground, a sharp pain shooting up her hip and elbow as they struck the cold pavement. Her purse flew open, and the wrapped gift for Thomas skidded across the snow, coming to rest beneath a bench. Gasps darted through the air, but quickly silenced, as if fear itself had warned everyone to stay out of it. A teenage boy recording with his phone lowered it halfway, unsure whether to intervene or keep capturing what the world seemed eager to share, but not fix. Maggie blinked through the spinning blur of pain and humiliation, her breath trembling. The cold bit deeper now, and tears she had tried to hide earlier burned hot against the winter wind. She tried to push herself up, but her hand shook too much to support her. Rick hovered above her, a smirk twisting his chapped lips. Yeah, that's what I thought. People like you don't belong out here pretending you matter. Maggie looked up at him. A man drowning, striking out at anything that dared float. She wanted to tell him she prayed not only for the ones she missed, but for the ones who were lost, as he was. But before she had the strength to form words, Rick's boot kicked snow toward her face. The act wasn't powerful, but degrading, and that humiliation cut deeper than the shove. A voice cracked out from behind Rick, sharp as shattering ice. Back away from her! Rick spun, unsteady, squinting to identify the challenger. Striding toward them was Officer Sean Miller, a local Snowbridge police officer who had been patrolling the holiday crowd. Officer Miller was in his early 30s, broad-shouldered with neatly trimmed blonde hair and a calm, reassuring presence. His uniform fit him crisp and clean, and his jaw showed the faint shadow of stubble from a long shift. He was the type of man who always tried to do the right thing, even if he didn't always succeed, a trait earned through years of standing up to a bullying father back home. Tonight, he had hoped for a quiet evening, maybe a cup of cocoa from the cafe. Instead, he found a scene that ignited the protector inside him. Rick barked out a laugh, though his confidence shook. Oh, look, the town hero. What are you going to do? Arrest me for talking? Officer Miller stepped closer, boots firm on the icy ground. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You assaulted an elderly woman. Step back and keep your hands visible. His hand hovered near his duty belt, ready. Rick blinked, assessing his chances. He wasn't sober enough to be smart, but he was human enough to feel fear. He raised his hands, mockingly compliant. Okay, no harm done. He backed off, though hostility burned in his stare. Officer Miller knelt by Maggie, his blue eyes filled with concern. Ma'am, are you all right? Can you move? Maggie tried a smile, small but sturdy. Yes, officer, just a bit shaken. He gently helped her sit up, checking her hands for trembling that might indicate a break. We'll get you looked at, he assured her. You're safe now. She believed him, or wanted to. But her heart continued to hammer against her ribs. Officer Miller looked up to call for medical assistance. unaware of the silhouettes approaching through the drifting snow. Two figures, one on 2 feet, one on 4 paws. The very answer Maggie had prayed for under the lights just minutes earlier. What Maggie couldn't see yet was that tonight's disaster was only the beginning of a miracle. The wind rushed across Snowbridge Square, scattering snowflakes like startled birds, as Officer Sean Miller helped Maggie Harper steady herself on trembling legs. Her hip throbbed sharply, a quick reminder of the shove she had endured, but she forced herself to remain upright, dignity stitched into every fragile breath. Rick Dalton, drunk with fury and humiliation, spat onto the ground, his jaw twitching as though a violent comeback trembled just beneath his skin. Before he could muster the courage to strike again, a sudden commanding sound cracked through the street, heavy paws thundering across ice. Maggie's eyes widened as a German shepherd emerged from the swirling snow, his muscular frame low and purposeful. He was large, over 90 pounds of tightly coiled discipline. His coat a mix of deep sable and copper, ears erect and sharp. His gaze was a soldier's gaze, alert, intelligent, fiercely focused. His name, though Maggie would soon learn it, was Ranger. Ranger moved without hesitation, placing his powerful body like a living shield between Maggie and Rick. His lips curled just enough to reveal white teeth, not a threat, but a promise. One more step, and consequences would follow. Rick stumbled backward, suddenly aware of just how breakable he was compared to the quiet menace before him. "Easy, boy," a calm voice called out, cutting through the rising tension. Footsteps approached, steady, controlled, and unmistakably familiar with danger. From the mist of falling snow strode Daniel Brooks, 28, his posture confident but never arrogant. He wore a dark navy coat thick enough to ease the sculpted muscle earned through years of grueling training. A faint scar traced his left cheek like a silver whisper, a memory of a mission that had cost him brothers he would never forget. His deep-set hazel eyes carried the weight of responsibility no young man should hold, yet also the flicker of compassion he never allowed to dim. His brown hair, cut short in military style, caught the reflections of Christmas lights behind him. Everything about him said protector. He halted beside Ranger, one hand resting near the dog's collar, not restraining, but guiding. Officer Miller straightened with relief. "Brooks? Didn't expect to see you back in town." Daniel offered a small nod. "Just passing through, taking some leave." His voice was smooth but low, the voice of someone who preferred action over conversation. Maggie gazed up, still dazed by pain and disbelief. She had never seen him before, but something about his presence, quiet, resolute, felt like an answer whispered directly from heaven. Ranger's attention remained locked on Rick, who, despite his size and anger, now looked like a child caught misbehaving. "This mutt better back off," Rick grunted, trying to find leftover bravado within his fogged mind. Officer Miller fixed him with a cold stare. "You're done, Rick. Turn around." When Rick didn't move, Daniel stepped forward, not even raising his voice. "You just assaulted an elderly woman. You don't walk away from that." And suddenly Rick understood that this man was different. Not just a good citizen, not just a passerby. A predator of predators. With a defeated sneer, Rick allowed Miller to guide him toward the patrol car, cuffs clicking around his wrists. He protested weakly about misunderstandings and accidents, but blame crumbled under the weight of witnesses and under Ranger's unblinking gaze. As they left, The town square's tense silence softened again under drifting snow. Daniel knelt beside Maggie, his gestures gentle where his demeanor had been steel moments before. "Ma'am, I'm Daniel. Are you in pain anywhere besides your hip?" Maggie nodded slowly, letting him help her sit on the bench. "Just shaken, and embarrassed I couldn't stay on my feet." She attempted a chuckle, but emotion cracked her voice. Daniel's expression softened, his scarred cheek tightening with empathy. "Nothing embarrassing about getting attacked." Ranger nudged his head gently into Maggie's hand, as if reassuring her. She smiled despite her tears, running trembling fingers through his warm fur. "What a brave dog. He reminds me of my Thomas, a protector." Daniel swallowed, glancing at Ranger with pride. "He's retired K9, saved lives in the field, lost his partner a year ago, been a bit lost himself since." Maggie's eyes shimmered, recognizing the same loneliness she carried. "I understand," she whispered, more to Ranger than to Daniel. Officer Miller returned, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Ambulance is on the way to check you out. And Brooks, thanks, again." Daniel waved it off. "Just glad we were close." Maggie took Daniel's hand, squeezing with gratitude far larger than her grip. "Thank you, my dear. You and this noble friend of yours. You came right when I needed someone." Daniel looked momentarily startled. Praise wasn't something he accepted easily. Before he could respond, Ranger shifted closer, resting his head against Maggie's knee as though claiming her. It felt like a vow. Snowbridge's heart had been watching from a distance, lights, carols, and all, and now whispered approval into the cold night air. Maggie, Daniel, and Ranger sat beneath the giant Christmas tree. A wounded widow, a haunted soldier, and a loyal guardian. They didn't know yet what they would become to one another. They only knew that in the darkest moment of a cold December night, none of them were alone anymore. Snowbridge Cottage Hospital was a small brick building with ivy clinging to old walls and soft yellow lights glowing through frosted windows. Inside, everything smelled faintly of peppermint sanitizer and warm linen. Daniel Brooks guided Maggie Harper through the automatic doors, his steady hand beneath her elbow. Ranger padded beside them, paws silent on the tile floor, alert but calm, tail flicking occasionally as if checking the rhythm of the room. A nurse at the triage station looked up. Nurse Lisa Harmon was in her late 30s, a round-faced woman with cinnamon-colored curls tied into a ponytail and warm brown eyes that always looked slightly worried, a side effect of caring too much in a world that often cared too little. She wore scrubs decorated with tiny snowmen and had a silver necklace shaped like a heart resting near her collarbone. Though cheerful by nature, she carried the weight of raising 2 children alone after a car accident took her husband 3 years prior. The loss had sharpened her instincts to rush to those who looked alone. "Oh dear," Lisa breathed, immediately walking around the counter. "What happened to you, sweetheart?" she asked Maggie, gently lifting the elderly woman's wrist to check her pulse. "Just a fall," Maggie replied, trying to smile but failing to hide the trembling in her voice. Daniel's jaw clenched. "She was pushed," he corrected, voice low. Ranger huffed an echo as if agreeing. Lisa's brow darkened with disapproval. "Well, let's get you comfortable. Come with me." She led them to a small exam room with light blue walls and a framed photo of a snowy mountain hanging crookedly above the sink. "I'll get Dr. Peterson. He's on shift tonight." As Maggie sat on the exam table, Daniel crouched down so he could look her in the eyes. "You're safe here. Ranger and I aren't going anywhere." Maggie placed her hand on Ranger's broad head, smiling weakly as the dog leaned closer, a warm presence against the cold that still lingered in her bones. "I believe you," she whispered. Moments later, the curtain pulled back and Dr. Benjamin Peterson stepped inside. He was in his mid-50s, tall and thin, with salt and pepper hair neatly parted to the side. His sharp gray eyes were softened by years of treating neighbors he considered family. He had a calm, composed demeanor, a trait developed from decades of emergency room chaos. And each line around his eyes seemed to tell a story of sleepless nights and stubborn hope for his patients. He wore a crisp white coat and carried a clipboard tucked under one arm. "Mrs. Harper, is it? I'm Dr. Peterson. Let's take a look at you." His examination was gentle but thorough. He pressed methodically at Maggie's hip, checking movement and expression. "No fracture," he concluded with relief. "Just bruising and swelling. A few days of rest and ice packs and you'll be sore, but all right." He cleaned a small cut on her elbow, the antiseptic sting making her wince. Daniel straightened beside her, posture tensing like he wished he could absorb the pain himself. Maggie noticed, touched by how deeply he seemed to care about someone he barely knew. As Dr. Peterson applied a bandage, he finally looked up at Daniel. "And you are?" "Daniel Brooks," Daniel replied. "Just visiting Snowbridge for a bit." His answer sounded practiced, politely distant, the kind meant to reveal nothing. The doctor nodded, though he studied Daniel a moment longer. He recognized a soldier's guarded eyes when he saw them. "Well, you did good bringing her in." Ranger sat watching every move with the precision of a sentinel. Dr. Peterson chuckled softly. "And I assume this is your bodyguard?" Daniel's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Something like that." When Lisa returned with paperwork, she overheard Maggie mumble, "I don't know how to thank you both." Daniel shook his head. "There's no need. Anyone would have," Lisa interjected quickly. "No, they wouldn't." Her voice wasn't sharp, just painfully honest. Maggie's gaze softened with gratitude that reached deeper than her bruises. "My husband used to say angels walk among us," she whispered. "I think he may have sent one tonight." Daniel swallowed. Praise always sat strangely on his shoulders. "I'm no angel, Mrs. Harper. Just someone who happened to be close." "But close is exactly what I prayed for," she replied gently. Those words slipped past the defenses he fought to keep intact. His heart gave a quiet, unexpected ache. Ranger nudged his knee as if reminding him he didn't have to run from kindness. After the discharge process, Lisa helped Maggie button her coat. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to call hospital dispatch," she insisted. "And please take it slow. Snow and pride both cause falls." Maggie laughed, tired but real. "I will be careful with both." Daniel walked her toward the exit, offering his arm once more. Outside, the snow had calmed, and the night felt less like a threat and more like a promise waiting to unfold. Maggie hesitated beside the curb, staring toward the dark road that led back home. "It's quite a walk, and buses are done for the night," she murmured, reluctant to ask the question forming on her lips. Daniel didn't wait for it. "Let me drive you home. Ranger will guard the back seat." He gave a reassuring nod, no hesitation. Warmth rushed through her chest, the kind she hadn't felt since Thomas was alive. "I would be grateful," she replied, voice soft with relief. As Daniel opened his truck door for her, and Ranger hopped into the back like the trained protector he was, A quiet truth settled into the night. The miracle she asked for at the base of the Christmas tree had already begun walking beside her. The ride to Maggie Harper's small cottage was quiet but not awkward, the kind of silence that felt like two souls catching their breath after fate had pushed them together too fast. Daniel Brooks drove his sturdy dark blue pickup with easy control, though his hands always seemed ready for a sudden crisis. Ranger rested in the back seat, his head lowered between the seats, vigilant eyes checking on Maggie every few seconds. Snowbridge's houses glowed with colorful holiday lights like hopeful lanterns guiding travelers through the cold. When Daniel pulled up to Maggie's home, a cozy single-story cottage painted pale yellow with a white porch railing, he noticed the gentle care she had put into maintaining it. The walkway was lined with faded Christmas decorations, wooden nutcrackers chipped with age, a wreath with a ribbon a little frayed at the edges. They were not new or fashionable, but deeply loved. Daniel rushed out to open her door, offering his arm again. Maggie accepted, not out of weakness, but gratitude. She fished her keys from her purse, noticing that her fingers trembled slightly, not just from the evening's ordeal, but from the surreal comfort of having someone beside her again. When the front door opened, warm air carrying the scent of cinnamon and old books greeted them. Daniel scanned the room subtly, in an instinctive habit learned from operations in foreign cities. Everything was tidy. A modest living room with floral-patterned furniture, shelves full of framed photos and small ceramic angels, and a kitchen that hummed with home. A single Christmas tree stood by the window, artificial but decorated with every memory Maggie had. Ornaments handmade by Thomas. A star crafted from cardboard 50 years ago, edges peeling. Love preserved in glitter and glue. "Please sit," Maggie urged, pulling off her coat and hanging it neatly. Her voice was softer now, but steadier. "I'll make us something warm. I have chicken soup. It's simple but good for nights that shake the bones." "I can help," Daniel offered quickly, not used to standing still while others worked. But Maggie lifted one eyebrow playfully. "Do you know how to chop carrots without injuring yourself, Mr. Navy SEAL?" He laughed under his breath, the kind of laugh he rarely allowed himself. "Fair question." He removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves. His forearms were lined with stark scars, silent testimonies to battles fought both outside and within. Maggie noticed but didn't comment. Instead, she asked gently, "Would you like bread or biscuits with your soup?" "Anything you make," he replied. Ranger lay near the kitchen table, paws stretched forward, like he was finally allowing himself to rest after the chaos. His ears still twitched whenever a car passed outside. Trauma had made vigilance his armor, but his eyes softened each time he looked up to find Daniel still there. As Maggie prepared the soup, she snuck glances at the Sitsun, young man standing across from her chopping vegetables with surprising precision. He looked younger up close, barely past boyhood in moments when his guard slipped. Yet his eyes belonged to someone who had been forced to grow up too fast. "So, Daniel," Maggie began, stirring the pot gently, "are you staying in Snowbridge long?" Daniel paused mid-chop. "I hadn't planned to. Just needed to disappear somewhere smaller for a bit. Rest between deployments." Maggie's heart tightened. "The world forgets that soldiers must heal too," she said softly. He nodded, eyes lowering. Ranger let out a quiet whine. Daniel reached down and brushed his ear. "He's helping me heal," Daniel admitted, "even when I don't think I deserve it." Maggie set the table with mismatched ceramic bowls. "Tell me about him," she asked, glancing at Ranger. Daniel smiled at the dog with quiet pride. He's 6, served overseas in a K-9 unit, lost his handler in an ambush and didn't eat for days after. When they tried to retire him out, he got aggressive with strangers. They were considering putting him down. Maggie gasped softly. Ranger lifted his head, recognizing the tone but not the words. Daniel continued, "But when I met him, he walked straight to me, put his paw on my chest like he was saying, 'You're mine.'" Maggie placed a gentle hand on her heart. "And now you take care of each other." "Every day," he said. They sat for dinner. Maggie bowed her head in a silent prayer. Daniel, surprisingly, did the same. Ranger lay quietly beside them, occasionally lifting his head for a hopeful sniff of soup. The warmth filled more than their stomachs. It thawed invisible ice lingering around both their hearts. Maggie asked about Daniel's family. His reply was quiet, but not cold. "I grew up in foster care. No one stuck around long. The Navy was the first place that felt like a home. But after losing some good men," his voice wavered, "hard to believe I still deserve one." Maggie reached across the table and placed her small, wrinkled hand on his. His fingers twitched at the unexpected comfort. "Home isn't a place that needs to be deserved," she said. "It's something your heart recognizes and chooses." Daniel blinked, looking momentarily overwhelmed. He nodded slowly. "Maybe so." Ranger nudged Daniel's leg, as if adding, "Especially you." After dinner, Maggie packed leftovers in a container for Daniel. "You saved me tonight," she said. "Please visit again. I make excellent hot cocoa." Daniel hesitated only briefly before replying, "I'd like that." When Daniel helped her to the couch and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, Maggie looked up at him with eyes glimmering like the lights on her modest tree. "You're a good man, Daniel Brooks." He shook his head. "Just doing what I was trained to do." Maggie smiled knowingly. "No, you were trained to fight. Tonight, you chose to care. That is different. That is special." Ranger settled beside Maggie, laying his head on her knee again. She stroked his fur, comforted by his loyalty. As Daniel watched her, small, bruised, but refusing to be defeated, something gentle and protective rose inside him, something he had buried beneath duty and loss. He didn't know the word for it yet, but Maggie did. Family. Tonight, the first threads of it had been stitched quietly over bowls of soup and kindness. Snowbridge slept under a blanket of moonlit snow as Daniel Brooks parked his truck outside his rental cabin, deep in the quiet woods on the edge of town. Frost glimmered over the pine branches, and the air was still enough to hear the distant hum of the wind through the mountains. Ranger hopped out first, his paws sinking softly into powdery white, nose up and alert as always. They'd only been back a few minutes, but the warmth of Maggie's home lingered in Daniel's mind, the glow of her kitchen lights, the laughter he wasn't used to, the feeling of belonging he didn't dare trust yet. The cabin was modest and sparsely furnished, a reflection of a life spent moving from place to place. A folded American flag sat atop a wooden dresser, the only decoration Daniel had placed himself. He removed his coat and boots while Ranger circled twice on his bed near the fireplace, curling into a watchful rest. Daniel rubbed the scar along his cheekbone, remembering how it felt when shrapnel ripped through flesh during a midnight ambush in Afghanistan. Though healed, it still pulsed sometimes, like tonight, whenever memory clawed too close. He paced, restless. The quiet was too loud. He poured water into a kettle on the stove. needing something to anchor his thoughts. Ranger raised his head, sensing the shift in his partner's breathing. "I'm okay," Daniel murmured, a lie repeated more often than truth. Across town, Maggie sat bundled on her sofa, mug of chamomile tea warming her palms. She replayed the entire night in her head. The fear, the pain, and then the miracle arrival of two protectors. She hadn't felt this safe since Thomas passed. She traced her thumb over her wedding ring, still worn proudly. "Thank you, Thomas," she whispered, "for sending help." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she no longer dreaded waking up. Hope had returned to her life in the shape of a soldier and his loyal dog. Meanwhile, at the Snowbridge County Jail, Rick Dalton sat in a holding cell, the fluorescent lights too bright for his pounding head. He ran a hand over his stubbled jaw, feeling the dull ache of regret somewhere under the bitterness. In another cell nearby, a heavy-set man snored loudly, a drunk brought in for fighting a vending machine. Rick scowled, arms crossed tight over his chest. He'd seen Daniel's eyes of a man who'd seen things Rick couldn't imagine. And the dog. Rick shivered, remembering that low, restrained growl. For the first time in years, he felt small, weak. The thought gnawed at him like hunger. Back at the cabin, Daniel sat on the couch, Ranger's head resting against his thigh. He let his hand drift over the dog's fur, grounding himself in the familiar warmth. He closed his eyes, and the world changed. Bright flashes, gunfire cracking through smoke, the smell of sand and iron, voices yelling in panic. Daniel reached for someone. Corporal Hayes, best friend and Svan's squad joker. But his fingers only grasped blood and dust. "Danny, go!" Hayes had shouted before the explosion launched Daniel backward into the dirt. When Daniel crawled up again, Ranger's old handler lay still, eyes open but life already gone. Ranger had howled, a sound ripped straight from the heart, before pressing against the fallen soldier's chest, as if refusing to let go. Daniel sat upright now, breath shallow, sweat chilling his spine. Ranger licked his hand, grounding him again in the present. "I know, buddy," Daniel whispered. "I know." The guilt never faded. He'd saved lives, many, but the ones he couldn't save tattooed themselves deeper than any scar. He stood and splashed cold water on his face. He hated that Maggie might see the cracks in him. She deserved someone stronger, not another broken person needing saving. But Maggie, she saw more than the uniform, more than the scars. Across the room, Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Captain Elijah Moore, his commanding officer. A stern but fair man in his early 40s, lean with sharp angles in his face that mirrored the sharp precision of his leadership. Captain Moore's text read, "Checking in. You hanging in there, Brooks? Take the time you need." Daniel stared at the message. It felt unfamiliar to be cared for beyond the line of duty. He didn't reply. Instead, he turned to Ranger. "We'll go see her tomorrow," he said quietly. Ranger wagged his tail, slow, soft, but sure. Morning arrived with soft sunlight melting icicles into tiny diamonds. Daniel, dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans, loaded Ranger into the truck once again. He told himself they were just checking on Maggie, making sure she was all right. Nothing more. But the flutter in his chest felt suspiciously like anticipation. When they arrived, Maggie was sweeping snow from her small porch. She wore a thick gray cardigan and a knitted beanie with a pom-pom that bobbed as she worked. Her cheeks were rosy from the brisk air, and her smile stretched wide the moment she saw them. She waved, and Daniel suddenly felt like he had come home from a long war. As Ranger trotted up to her, Maggie knelt despite her sore hip, patting him fondly. "There's my hero," she said, eyes twinkling. Daniel held up a paper bag. "I brought cinnamon rolls from Maple and Crust Bakery." Maggie gasped like he'd brought gold. "Those are my favorite. I always say I'll buy one for myself, then I end up buying none because I think I'll spoil my dinner later." She laughed at her own habit. Daniel smiled, the corners of his armor peeling just a little more. "Come in, both of you," Maggie said. "I want to show you something." As they stepped inside, she reached for a small photo frame on her shelf. A picture of a young Thomas Harper in Army uniform, handsome and proud, arm around a very young Maggie, whose smile was pure sunshine. "I think Thomas would have liked you," she said, softly. Daniel didn't know how to respond. Praise was a foreign language, one he feared misinterpreting. But something in his chest loosened. Ranger whined lightly, bumping Daniel's leg. Maggie chuckled. "See? Even Ranger agrees." For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to feel the warmth of someone's belief, and he didn't push it away. Evening wrapped Snowbridge in a shimmering veil of gold and navy as Christmas music drifted from the town square speakers. Families gathered beneath the giant tree for the annual Snowbridge Eve Light Festival, a tradition Maggie Harper had not attended since Thomas passed. But tonight, she wasn't alone. Daniel Brooks stood beside her, Ranger sitting at his heel like a silent knight, scanning the crowd with unwavering vigilance. Maggie wore a red knitted scarf that once belonged to her husband, and her cheeks flushed with both cold and excitement. Daniel noticed how her eyes gleamed under the lights, alive again. It made him proud for reasons he couldn't quite name. Children chased each other around snowy bushes, their laughter rising into the crisp air. Vendors sold hot cocoa and gingerbread cookies, the sweet scent swirling warmly through the square. Maggie took it all in as if rediscovering a world she thought she had lost. "Thomas always loved this festival," she murmured. "He'd bring me here and buy the worst hot chocolate just to see me wrinkle my nose." Daniel chuckled, imagining her younger self laughing under these same lights. Nearby, a young woman named Emily Carter nervously clutched her purse. She was perhaps 28, with shoulder-length caramel hair tucked under a white beanie and soft freckles across her pale cheeks. Her blue eyes darted anxiously every few seconds. Emily was a single mother, her husband having left 2 years ago without a goodbye. That abandonment carved unease into her bones, especially concerning her 6-year-old son, Joshua Carter. Joshua was small for his age, with messy blonde hair and big brown eyes full of curiosity. His navy jacket swayed behind him like a cape as he darted around, playing superhero. Emily's heart skipped when she turned, and Joshua was gone. "Josh?" Her voice was tight with fear. The crowd seemed suddenly enormous, shadows swallowing every child-sized space. She spun left, then right, panic rising like a tide. Joshua, meanwhile, had been chasing a playful puppy that escaped its owner. He ran further down a darkened path near the park's edge, giggling, until he realized he couldn't hear the crowd anymore. The puppy ran off, and the little boy stood alone amid towering trees, dusted white. The cold wind bit through his jacket. "Mom?" he whispered, voice cracking. His breath puffed like frightened ghosts. Then a branch snapped. Animal eyes glinted from deep in the woods. Joshua stumbled backward, slipping into a patch of deeper snow. His tiny hands shook as he whimpered, "Mommy!" Back at the festival, Emily's world narrowed to a single terror. She rushed to a police volunteer station where familiar Officer Sean Miller stood. He had traded his winter coat for a bright reflective vest, radio static buzzing at his shoulder. Fear tightened Emily's voice. "My son, Joshua, he's missing." Officer Miller immediately turned alert and serious. "Stay here. I'll call backup." But Daniel had already heard. He locked eyes with Ranger, who was already on his feet, body tense and alert, every sense sharpened like a drawn blade. Maggie saw the sudden change in Daniel's posture. Shoulders squared, voice clipped with calm urgency. "Ranger, track," Daniel commanded. The German shepherd surged forward, nose to the ground, weaving through footprints and trampled snow. Daniel followed, swift and purposeful. Officer Miller caught up and shouted to Maggie, "Stay here with dispatch!" Maggie clutched her scarf, heart pounding, whispering a prayer she hoped traveled fast. Ranger led them away from the music, toward the tree line where darkness pooled thicker. "Joshua," Daniel called, his deep voice echoing through the cold silence. No answer. Ranger veered left, ears pricked, then barked, a sharp alert. Daniel sprinted ahead with the officer close behind. Beyond a cluster of trees, a tiny shape trembled in the snow. Joshua, curled small, eyes wide with fear at the wolf-like creature approaching. Ranger slowed and lowered himself to the ground, belly pressing against snow to appear gentle. He let out a soft whine. "Doggy," Joshua whispered, reaching a shaking hand. Daniel arrived, kneeling in front of the boy. "Hey, buddy, you're safe. Let's get you back to your mom." He wrapped his coat around Joshua, lifting him quickly but carefully. The child melted into his warmth, shivering. Officer Miller radioed in. "Found him! Bringing him back!" They hurried toward the music and lights that now seemed like a distant dream of safety. When Emily saw Daniel carrying her son, she cried out, not fear now, but relief bursting like fireworks. She ran to them, tears freezing on her lashes. "Josh, oh baby." She hugged him tightly as Daniel passed him gently into her arms. "I'm sorry, Mommy," the boy whispered, burying his face into her coat. Emily looked up, voice trembling. "I can't thank you enough." Her eyes flicked to Ranger. "Both of you." Daniel gave a small nod, awkward with gratitude. "He's a brave kid. And this guy—" He glanced at the dog, who puffed his chest proudly. "He did most of the work." People nearby clapped, the kind of applause that felt like more than noise. It was recognition, respect, and maybe even hope. When Maggie reached them, she wrapped Daniel in a gentle, motherly hug. He stiffened at first, unfamiliar with being held. Then slowly, he relaxed into her arms. "See?" she whispered. "You were meant to be here tonight." Daniel swallowed, emotion thick in his throat. The voices around them blurred. Ranger pressed into his knee, grounding him once more. As the Christmas tree lights flared brighter in a dazzling display, Snowbridge celebrated not just the holiday, but a miracle. A lost boy was found. A broken soldier took another step toward healing. And a lonely widow felt her heart grow full once again. Family was beginning to form. In the most unexpected way, snow drifted lazily across Snowbridge the morning after the festival, as if the sky itself had chosen to bless the town with a fresh beginning. Maggie Harper stood at her kitchen window, watching thin sunlight spill over the frosted yard. Her hips still ached when she moved too quickly, but joy had a way of numbing pain. On the small dining table behind her sat a new framed photo printed by Nurse Lisa. Maggie, Daniel, and Ranger smiling beneath the giant Christmas tree, with twinkling lights like stars caught in their hair. Maggie placed her fingertips gently against the image. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a ghost walking through someone else's life. She felt present, needed, seen. A knock came at the door. Ranger barked once. An alert, not a threat. Before Daniel stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. He wore a charcoal sweater under his jacket, his usually stern jaw softened by a calm he was still getting used to. "Morning, Maggie," he said with a small smile. "Hope we're not too early." "We?" Maggie raised a brow. Ranger looked up and gave a hopeful woof. Maggie laughed. "Oh, silly me. Of course you count too." Daniel breathed out a soft, almost shy chuckle. "I brought breakfast. And a shovel. Thought I'd clear the porch and driveway for you." Maggie's chest warmed. "You always think of what needs doing," she said. "That's a blessing. But come in, come in. It's too cold for long conversations at the doorway." While Maggie prepared coffee, Daniel stepped outside to shovel. His movements were smooth and efficient. He approached snow the same way he approached enemy forces. Eliminate and secure. Watching from the window, Maggie marveled at how natural he looked doing something so ordinary. It was as though the quiet chores of a peaceful life fit him just as well as a uniform ever did. Ranger sat at her feet, gazing at the door with absolute trust. "You love him very much, don't you?" Maggie whispered, rubbing the dog's ear. "Me too." Ranger gave a contented sigh. Daniel returned with flushed cheeks from the cold. Maggie handed him a steaming mug. "That's better," she said, proud of herself like a hostess entertaining royalty. Before they could settle, another knock came. Maggie opened the door to find Evelyn Baker, her next-door neighbor. Evelyn was in her 70s but tall and striking, with cropped silver hair and the bold, confident posture of a woman who once commanded boardrooms. She wore a deep purple winter coat and carried a tin decorated with snowflakes. "I heard about last night," Evelyn said, worry and admiration mixing in her dark eyes. "And I brought cinnamon cookies." Maggie ushered her in. Evelyn took one look at Daniel and Ranger and smiled warmly. "Oh, so these must be the heroes I keep hearing about." Daniel straightened but looked amused. "Just did what anyone would have done." Evelyn scoffed. "Dear, I've lived 72 years, and I assure you, not anyone would have done what you did." Her presence filled the room with a new kind of comfort. Louder, brighter, matching the sparkle in her coat buttons. She hugged Maggie longer than expected, as if reminding her that love didn't disappear when spouses did. Ranger sniffed Evelyn's coat, cataloging her as friendly, then trotted back to Maggie with approval. Later that afternoon, Daniel drove Maggie and Ranger toward a scenic overlook above Lake Snowbridge, a hidden spot he'd stumbled upon while clearing his mind on long runs. The lake's surface looked like a sheet of polished silver, reflecting pines dusted in powdered sugar. The cabin air had been cozy, but this was wonder. Maggie leaned on Daniel's arm for support as they walked to a bench overlooking the frozen water. Ranger sat faithfully beside them, tail sweeping slow arcs through the snow. "Daniel," Maggie began softly, "I know your life is complicated. I know you belong to the world. Missions, orders, danger." Her voice wavered slightly. "But if there's ever a moment you want a home to come back to, even just for holidays, my door will always be open. For both of you. Daniel looked at her, the wind brushing strands of hair across his forehead. He wasn't used to this kind of invitation, one not tied to duty, but to love freely given. Maggie, he breathed, voice rough with emotion he could no longer bury. She continued gently. You don't owe me anything. I don't expect anything. But you protected me when I needed it most. And I can protect you in other ways. Soup, listening, believing in you. That last line shattered what was left of Daniel's walls. He knelt before her in the snow, eyes level with hers. Mrs. Harper, he said quietly, could I call you Maggie? And someday, would you be okay if I called you Mom? For a heartbeat, all sound disappeared. The wind paused. Ranger stared, ears perked. Tears surged instantly in Maggie's eyes. She cupped Daniel's face in trembling hands, the way mothers do when they're afraid dreams might vanish if they blink. You already are my son, she whispered. You and this noble dog of yours. Daniel bowed his head, overwhelmed. Maggie kissed the crown of his hair, the same way she used to comfort herself after Thomas died. Except now she was comforting someone else back into living. Ranger nudged between them, insisting on being part of the embrace, and they both laughed, wet-eyed and joyful. As they returned to the truck, the setting sun painted the sky pink and gold, a watercolor promise. Daniel glanced down at Maggie. What about Christmas dinner? I can cook. Maggie gasped dramatically. A Navy SEAL who knows his way around a kitchen. I may have won the lottery. Daniel grinned. Well, I make a mean roast. Ranger can vouch. Ranger barked in agreement. Maggie looped her arm, through Daniel's. Then it settled. A family dinner. Daniel repeated the words softly, as if testing their reality. A family dinner. The idea filled him with something warm and astonishing. Hope. As snowflakes fluttered lazily down once more, they climbed into the truck. Ranger rested his head in Maggie's lap while Daniel started the engine. For the first time in a long time, every heart in that truck was heading home. In a world that often feels cold and uncertain, sometimes God sends us miracles not wrapped in thunder or lightning, but in the form of a loyal dog, a brave young man, or a kind soul who simply refuses to let darkness win. Maggie thought she had lost everything, yet heaven reminded her that love doesn't end. It just finds new ways to return. A soldier who carried wounds no one could see discovered that healing doesn't always come from doctors or missions. It comes from family. And a German shepherd, once trained for war, finally found the place his heart had been searching for. Home. Maybe you're watching right now with a heavy heart. Maybe you're missing someone you love, or facing challenges you don't speak about. But remember this, God is still writing your story. He works quietly in the background, guiding the right people into your life at the perfect moment, just like He did for Maggie, for Daniel, and for Ranger. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below where you're watching from so we can pray for your city. And subscribe to our channel so you never miss a reminder that God is still doing miracles every single day. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May He surround you with loyal hearts and gentle angels, some with wings and some with paws. If you believe that love never dies and that miracles still walk among us, write Amen in the comments. Thank you for being part of this family.